Well, it's here. The 3.3 Libra patch has finally landed, at least in its beta state, and of course, finally, it was announced about a week ago. So today we're going to go and take a look at some of the features about this particular patch and all the major changes that it brings, because there are some massive changes ahead of us, mostly in the Unity department. First of all, we're going to need to start off with administration capacity. Normally, in the top of the screen, we would have Empire Sprawl and Admin Cap. This is no longer relevant to the game in general. Administrative capacity is no longer increasable. You can no longer improve it anymore. A good example if we go to our Empire, the administrative offices no longer have bureaucrats involved, which is a little bit interesting. They now generate Unity instead, whereas previously they would generate the joys of the Empire Sprawl, or at least Admin Cap, and that has now completely changed. Now, it's a good note to take right at the get-go is that Empire Sprawl is never below 50. You will always get 50 right off the get-go, and it's really important to know that you have this here limit. So that's something that you want to keep in the back of your head. In addition, as well, in conjunction with this is the Edict Cap system. Now, the Edict Cap system basically worked a little bit like this. If you would go to your Empire in the past and you would select for instance, the Imperial setup, you will get the ability to get more edicts. It has now been changed into power projection, and we'll get into that a little bit later. However, what it turns into is this new system, which is called the Edict Fund system, which is now available as well. Essentially, what this does it gives you a certain amount of Unity in a pool that you can spend. Now, please do be aware that this amount of Unity is a base of 10 plus your ruler skill. So essentially, as of right now I've got a ruler of level 2, which means they get plus 10. At level 3, they get plus 15. At level 4, 20, etc. And of course, the more Unity you have in your pool, the more edicts you can actually have. And a good way to illustrate this is the Map the Stars edict. It now costs 16, or at least a base of 10, to plus a percentage of your Empire Sprawl. And at a base cost of 10, it means that half of your edict pool or your edict funds can be spent on Map the Stars right away, as long as you've unlocked the particular tree for the discovery tree. That actually, in as a side effect, actually makes discovery extremely powerful. We'll get into that a little bit shortly, but essentially what it boils down to is that Map the Stars is incredibly cheap and incredibly good. And whereas previously you would have to, for instance, pick Influence in order to get your edicts, now you get to use your Unity pool, which means that your Influence can be used on normal things like expanding your Empire. So there's a lot of very interesting things that are going on with this. In addition, for instance, and we can now talk about the Discovery Traditions. Discovery Traditions actually have a couple of very interesting modifiers that have direct impact on your Empire. And I do think that this particular change, as well as the Unity system in general, is a low-key buff for discovery, mainly because it allows us to increase survey speed. We'll get to why that is relevant shortly, but most importantly, Polytechnic Education now increases leader experience-ship gain by 25% plus their cap, which essentially means that our leaders can actually learn faster and become more important quicker, but also we can increase our edict cap, or at least our edict fund, a lot quicker as well due to the increase in experience that they can gain. Now, why does the survey speed have impact? Well, allow me to illustrate this by picking up a leader. A leader right now will cost you 200 Unity, which means at the start of the game, you do not have the resources in order to pick a new leader. And this has a massive knock-on effect, because essentially it means that you cannot just sell off all your alloys, all your consumer goods, or all your food to crank out science ships and essentially go out into the wild yonder and explore all over the place. And once again, this is where discovery comes in, because To Boldly Go, as well as the some of the other modifiers here, such as faith and science, etc., they all have knock-on effects to this to allow you to explore faster. Automated surveying has another knock-on effect here that is very important. So yeah, in general, going discovery first is even more important than it used to be. It has a massive bonus to the current setup. Now, of course, you can pick a new leader once you get 200 unity, or you could pick your first tradition at 300. And this is also really important because you want to go ahead and pick your traditions, and of course usually it's discovery that is really important because A, it unlocks Map the Stars, and on top of that you get increased anomaly research speed, which with the lack of scientists you're going to have at the start of the game is going to be increasingly important. But there are other things as well. There is entire systems that have been ripped out that used influence before and will now use unity. For instance, reforming your government, if we go to the reform government screen, this will now cost a amount of unity. And at the start of the game, it will be 510 unity, which by itself is not all that much, and all of these numbers are up for grabs and up for change. Previously, it was 200 influence, which was an amount that would grow significantly slower over time, but now you can actually change your government quite quickly and efficiently, which is rather nice. Factions, on the other hand, have had a change as well. They no longer have any influence bonuses, but instead will be generating unity if you've managed to embrace all their issues. There's a couple of weird quirks here where you can suppress and promote a faction by doing nothing. You can just literally go ahead and promote or suppress a faction without any losses. And I'm pretty sure this is going to change in the future as well. Embracing a faction will still cost you influence, but you can steer your internal politics a lot easier than you could do before, which is rather cool. Another one that's also here is that megastructures will now cost unity rather than influence. So for instance, if you want to build a megastructure of any particular kind except for ring worlds or habitats, or gateways in that sense, they will cost unity rather than influence as they did before, which is also a major thing there. Now, as we've already talked a little bit about factions no longer generating influence, this does mean that there is a different way of generating influence. Normally, you would get a basic amount of influence throughout a technology or through factions. This has now been shifted to naval capacity. So essentially, if you hit the maximum amount of naval cap that you have, then you can generate a certain amount of influence. And essentially what it means is it takes the total amount of fleet divided by the amount of empire sprawl, and that will be your naval coverage. So essentially in this particular case we have almost no fleet. However, that small amount of fleet divided by our empire sprawl is generating 0.08 influence. That basically means that if you want to go on the expansion direction and really want to spread out your empire all over the place, it means you will actually need a reasonable amount of fleet power in order to expand so that you can generate the influence needed. Of course, there are different ways of getting influences as well, for instance through, say, the Galatron, etc. However, that is not something that you can guarantee right off the get-go, which is something you need to watch out for. Speaking of other things you need to watch out for is edicts, but specifically the campaigns. Previously, what would happen is you would select a education campaign or recycling campaign, and you would pay a single lump sum up front. Now, initially when I was playing around with this, essentially what happened was it's like, oh, okay, the education campaign is now 117. What I didn't realize is that it's 117 per month rather than a flat fee. This is now a ticking money sink where you can have the recycling campaign or you can have the education campaign. It's just going to cost you this amount of credits per month rather than a lump sum. This is a hole that I jumped into pretty early on, which is something you're going to need to watch out for. Then there is such a thing as Planetary Ascension. So Planetary Ascension is a rather fascinating system that allows you to specialize your planets in improving their resource output on a tall style play. As you can see right now, I have a relatively small amount of territory with a bunch of planets that I could colonize, but I'm not going to at the moment, and I'm going to stick with these planets for now and maybe expand to this ocean world because it is size 24. However, in order to actually being able to compete with some of these other empires that have a lot more worlds and a lot more space and a lot more resources, I now have the ability to specialize my planets and ascending them to a higher level. Now this is basically locked behind tier 3 of Ascension perks. As soon as you get tier 3 of Ascension perks, you have the ability to upgrade your planet's Ascension tier. After the 4th one, you get another tier, etc, etc. And then if you get your final tier, you unlock another set, all the way maxing out to 10. Now what does this actually mean? If we go, for instance, to Planet over here, there's this little button that is called Upgrade Ascension Tier. And for the cost of only 7,380 Unity, I can upgrade this Forge World and allow the planetary designation, yes, the planetary designation of Forge World, to increase its production. So Forge World in this particular case essentially gives you a bonus of Metallurgist upkeep by reduces by 20% and Industrial District build speed increases by 25%. Is that any good? No, this is not something that we would want to modify because we wouldn't get any resources out of it. However, if we go for instance to Earth, and this is an Empire capital, we already have a Ascension Tier 2 installed here, and what it basically boils down to is that this particular planet has increased stability all the way up to 100% at the moment. It generates additional amenities, it has 150% governing ethics attraction modifier, and it generates additional resources from jobs. That by itself may not seem like all that much, but as once you have your Ascension tiers maxed out to level 10, this stuff gets pretty crazy. Especially, for instance, if you put the stuff on, say, a ring world, especially a research ring world, you start to get 50% bonuses, flat bonuses on your researchers, and that's not even including building bonuses or anything along those lines. If we, for instance, go to this particular planet here, this mining world, which for some reason has been automatically designated. Essentially what we could do here, miner and strategic resource gatherer output, we could change that. Right now it is 25%. So let's say we upgrade that, it goes instantly, and now it is plus 31%. We do it again, it is now plus 37%. So the amount of minerals that we're going to be producing here, and we're going to keep our eye on the clock here for the end of the month to see what kind of output we have. We have 149 here at the moment, and as soon as the month ticks over, that should be increasing. Let's hope so. But essentially our miners will have an improved output on this planet, which is pretty darn crazy, and you can scale this up into god tier, especially when you have things like high quality minerals or luxury distributed, or maybe even something like Ecumenopole. You can get to some crazy level of bonuses as long as you keep your empire small, because the empire sprawl modifier is still there. It will still cost things, but in the end you want to keep this as small as possible if you want to go into a tall Unity based build. And that also has knock-on effects to other things, like you will have a lot of administrative offices everywhere or a lot of research complexes. You can min-max this all over the shop and try to get your traditions all over the place and trying to rush that. In this particular case, I went with Transcendence, a little bit slow, 86 years into the game, getting 4 slots available, but even then we already have a plentitude of Ascension tiers running. Now, one thing with Ascension tiers that we want to keep in mind is that every single time that we upgrade, it's going to be tiered to the next level. So if we have if we've already upgraded one planet to level 2, and as well as another one to, say, level 3, which is then combined level 5, then let's say that we upgrade this planet to tier 1, it would have the cost of a 6th tier, even though there's individual tiers involved there. So it's something we want to keep in mind there. But yeah, massive bonuses from Ascension tiers. Even though I'm not a particular big fan of this button, this could have been done a little bit more flexibly, I think. I think this is going to have major impacts on gameplay and really allow players to crank out insane amounts of resources resources, whether or not it be with Echimonopole or with mining worlds, food worlds, etc. So a lot of massive bonuses to be had there, and especially considering I want to turn this particular planet into an Echimonopolis, it's going to be absolutely insane. But once again, it is a thing that you want to keep in mind, that you're spending Unity, and sometimes that Unity is going to be spent on traditions or on specializing your planets. So you want to have a large pool of Unity production on standby, which is rather important. Now, there's a lot of other things that are changed here as well. For instance, what we can talk about here is some of the civics. Now, we talked a little bit about power projection already. It has a base cost of about 20. You can get a max of 2.0 power projection, which basically translates to 2.0 influence. If you are, for instance, an empire of the Imperial variety, you can add a power projection of +1, which essentially translates to 1 additional influence. The Imperial cult, on the other hand, and we can probably just navigate to it right here. Imperial Cult increases the Edict Fund to +100. So instead of having the base here of what I have right now of 69 to 136, if I would have Imperial Cult, it would essentially increase everything to 235 out of 69 right now, which would allow us to do even more stuff. But we have a fairly large amount of Empire Sprawl that does not allow us to do a lot of these sort of things, which is something we would keep in mind. Similar for Inwards Perfection, something that we want to keep in mind here as well. Also adds Edict Fund instead of Edict Capacity, which is rather nice. There is also other changes. Merchant guilds no longer produce Unity, otherwise it would be super overpowered. Brand loyalty is also an Edict Fund modifier. Subsumed will and OTA upgrades will add additional Edict Funds for robots, which is rather nice. This is a very interesting one. Feudal Society will now reduce leader hiring costs by 50%, and we can navigate there again. Let's see if we can find it here. Feudal Society. Leaders do not cost Unity upkeep if they are employed, because they do have an upkeep when they are not employed. So for instance, if we go to our leaders right now, they do have an upkeep cost of 2.0 Unity. But in a feudal society, they don't have that cost. So we have that flexibility, which is rather nice. It still does not make feudal society good in any way, shape, or form, but it's a nice gesture. Still though, another thing you want to keep in mind here is that you cannot dismiss your leaders, and employed governors generate Unity equivalent to their level. So in this particular case, if I would have my leaders, my governor is level 2, I've got a bunch of scientists, so I would probably be generating somewhere around 20 to maybe 30 additional Unity, which in the early to mid game can actually be a big effect. Right now I'm producing Unity out of my ass, so that doesn't really have all that much impact, but still within the grand scheme of things, that is a massive bonus. Also, Psionics has a really nice little combo with Unity, so you kind of want to keep that in the back of your head. But yeah, stuff is happening with Feudal Society, which I think is rather deserved, because it's one of those civics that is just undervalued significantly. Technocracy, on the other hand, has had a massive change. I wouldn't say a nerf or a boost. It has been completely overhauled. Essentially what happens is that science directors, scientists, will have twice as high as a chance to discover a technology that falls within their field of study. Now, what does that boil down to? If we go to the science menu here, and let's say that we have a scientist in, say, the computing category. So let me just quickly grab a different scientist here. I would probably need to grab somebody from the society tier, as I've got nothing available. So let's say that I have a scientist in the expertise in new worlds. That means that if you're running a technocracy and you have a new world scientist, you have twice the amount of chances to get a new world's technology. And what does that mean for society in this particular case? It's things like habitability bonuses, or blockers, or tile blockers once again, or colonial centralization, that sort of thing. So it basically allows you to specialize or focus your science a lot better. So let's say you want to focus on biology and pop growth speed, you get a biologist in your empire. You want a psionicist, you get a psionic researcher, and that sort of thing. And especially if you're playing as a materialist, which you will need to be if you are technocracy, somewhat materialist. You no longer need to be fanatic in that sense. You can get psionics as a materialist a lot easier than you could before, which is pretty massive. You just need to get yourself a psionic scientist somehow, which is obviously the bigger challenge in that respect. But yeah, technocracy has had a change. Pearl Divers, which is one of the special ones from Aquatics, essentially gives you additional trade value, which is pretty darn interesting. Traditions and Ascension perks have changed as well. I would like to say, by the way, One Vision now has turned into S+ tier, maybe even better than Technological Ascendancy in my personal opinion, because of the Unity bonuses that you can get out of it. And Unity is so much more important in the game right now. Executive Vigor, which is one of the basic ones. Executive Vigor, where are you? Yeah, there we go. Instead of giving you 2 additional edicts, it gives you a +1 edict fund, as an example. Grand Council and Harmonious Directive Traditions. Grand Council, where is that even? I cannot even remember. But Integrated Preservation, or the Harmonious Directives, will now give you additional edict fund as well, which was previously 1 edict capacity. Integrated Preservation Traditions no longer gives you admin cap because it's been stripped from the game entirely, but instead it gives you additional chances of automatic resettlement chance. And Void Dwellers gives you discounts on upgrading habitats. Now, upgrading habitats is now also more expensive than it was before because it will actually now cost you a certain amount of resources aside from the alloys that you have to put into it. Planetary Unification, which is one of the default ones, as an origin, will now give you additional unity instead of like a +5 bonus instead of a flat. Planetary Unification, which is a technology. My apologies. This is actually a pretty big one, and I have a save file specifically for this because I saw it as well, and I wanted to highlight it. So, Planetary Unification. The technology itself, essentially what it does, and it doesn't fit on the screen right now, it gives you 6 months worth of Unity production with a maximum of 1,000, plus 5% Unity a month, which is pretty big. So in this particular case, I would be getting 6 times 40, which is 240 in this particular case. So you may not necessarily want to go for Planetary Unification until you can get 1,000 out of it. So 6 months... So I would say 180 Unity a month before you would even look at Planetary Unification in order to get the best value out of it. But this is more of a min-max scenario where you want to take it at the best opportunity, which is something that is important to keep in the back of our head. Technologies that increase Unity production. Essentially, any Unity production technologies will now increase edict funds. Monuments, which is another interesting one, and we can take a look at that here. They will produce 1 Unity, but also increase Unity from jobs by 5%, which by itself may sound like a lot, but is not necessarily the best option to take right off the get-go, especially if you're producing, say, 50 Unity. 5% of that is not all that amazing. That's one... that's what, like 3 Unity in general. So it's usually better to go for a administrative office or a hollow theater, and until you generate, say, 100 Unity on a planet, I don't think you want to go for the monuments just yet. But you do get an additional unit of Unity for every single Ascension perk that you have, so that is up to 8. Overall, pretty interesting, but not the greatest right off the get-go, and you're going to need to balance that pretty well. Memorialists and death cults can now choose whether or not they want Unity buildings or their Memorialist buildings, which is rather important as well, so you can no longer spam that. They are planetary unique as well, so you can no longer spam monuments all over the shop. Spiritualist empires can now acquire technologies associated with the memorial as well as their faith buildings, which is a pretty big deal. Spiritualists are also massively boosted in this particular patch, by the way, which is something you would probably want to check out. So, yeah. Administrators are now called politicians. Bureaucrats, priests, and everything else have been essentially been removed, as far as I understand. If we can quickly go here. Yeah, politicians, they're now here, so they're no longer called administrators. And, well, bureaucrats are still here, but I think that is a work in progress. But yeah, there is a ton of different changes here that are going to significantly impact your playstyle. Like, there's a bunch of minor things. Like, I talked about the habitats before. Previously, a habitat upgrade just cost you alloys. Now you will need to pay 25 or 50 influence depending on what tier. Living metal will now spawn if you're playing Here Be Dragons, which is a pretty big deal as well. There's a lot of different bug fixes that you can go and take a look at, and the patch notes for the Libra patch will be in the description down below, as well as details on how to actually acquire this particular patch, because there's a lot of very interesting things going on here. I do hope that you've learned something with this particular overview, and that you're looking forward to it towards this patch. It really allows Unity to shine together with the technology playstyle. Technology was always the go-to way of playing the game, and with this particular change, it allows Unity to be on par with that. And whereas technology previously had repeatables, now Unity has, for instance, these Planetary Ascension perks that can really can get out of control if you have a strong Unity build within your empire. And the stability is completely out of control, which I absolutely love. Tall, stable empires with a lot of production are now completely feasible, and it's something that you should probably try out. Sure, discovery is a lot slower at the start of the game because you cannot spam science ships everywhere, which means that first contact will be a little bit slower. This also means that things like the diplomatic corps is not necessarily as powerful as it used to be, and also the galactic community won't start as early as it did before. But still, there's a lot of very interesting things going on within the game, and yeah, something new for you to explore. A lot of changes are afoot. None of the numbers that you've seen today are final. There's still a lot of tweaking going on. You can go and join the patch using the link in the description below. It is in the dev diary itself. So feel free to go and check out this new 3.3 Libra patch. I'm really looking forward to see what you think about it. So let me know what you feel. Is Unity good? Is Unity good now? Is this a good way of playing the game? Does this allow you to play in the way that you've always hoped and dreamed of? Is technology still the way to play for you? Are you hunkering for something more interesting, a different way of playing? Because I have, and I've been having a lot of fun with this Unity change. So let me know down in the comments below how you feel about these changes and how you see this develop in the future. I want to thank you so much for watching, and of course my patrons for making these videos possible, and we're going to go and take it from here. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take good care of yourselves, and as always, Unity is back, baby, and it's looking pretty good.